Dawn accidentally sent me their romantic Santorini vacation photos while I was hosting our company's annual charity gala with 300 guests. I projected every intimate moment onto the ballroom's massive screens during my husband's keynote speech about integrity in business partnerships. The projector remote slipped from my trembling hands as Richmond's voice faltered mid-sentence, and 300 of Seattle's most influential business leaders witnessed his secret Greek getaway with his 26-year-old assistant unfold in crystal-clear 4K resolution. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. But to understand how a simple photo mix-up destroyed 15 years of marriage and launched the biggest corporate scandal in Pacific Northwest history, we need to go back to that Friday afternoon when everything seemed perfect. My name is Beverly Morrison, and until 6 weeks ago, I was living what everyone considered the ultimate success story. Married to Richmond Morrison, founder and CEO of Morrison Strategic Consulting, one of Seattle's fastest-growing firms. We were the power couple featured on the cover of Seattle Business Monthly just last spring, him in his perfectly tailored Armani suit, me in my custom Vera Wang dress, standing in front of our Mercer Island waterfront mansion with Mount Rainier gleaming behind us. The headline read, "The Morrisons, Building Business Empire Through True Partnership." The article praised how Richmond handled the strategic consulting while I managed Morrison Foundation, our charitable arm that had donated over $3 million to local education initiatives. We were Seattle's golden couple, the ones other executives aspired to become. 15 years. 15 years of building something together, from Richmond's tiny Capitol Hill office to a 100-employee firm with clients across 3 states. I'd been there through the 18-hour days, the rejected proposals, the near bankruptcy in year 3 when the tech bubble burst. I'd mortgaged my inheritance to keep us afloat, sold my grandmother's jewelry to make payroll, worked weekends for 5 years straight to help build his dream. And it was our dream, wasn't it? Every major decision made together. Every celebration shared. Every triumph earned through mutual sacrifice, or so I believed. That Friday started like any other successful day in our carefully orchestrated life. I was in my downtown office at Morrison Foundation, putting finishing touches on the annual charity gala scheduled for the following evening. The Partnerships for Progress Gala was my signature event. 6 months of planning, coordination with Seattle's elite, and fundraising that would benefit underprivileged students across King County. The Fairmont Olympic Hotel's Grand Ballroom was booked, the catering menu finalized, the auction items secured. 300 of Seattle's most influential business leaders would attend, including Mayor Mayor Williams, along with tech executives, venture capitalists, and philanthropy leaders. Richmond was delivering the keynote address about building sustainable business partnerships, a topic he'd become quite passionate about lately. I was reviewing the final guest list when my phone chimed with a text notification. The sender showed up as Dawn K, with a phone number I didn't immediately recognize, though something about it felt familiar. Dawn Kellison was Richmond's executive assistant, hired 18 months ago when his previous assistant retired. Young, ambitious, with an MBA from University of Washington and impeccable references, I'd interviewed her myself, impressed by her sharp intelligence and professional demeanor. The message preview showed, "Beverly finally uploaded all the photos from," followed by what appeared to be photo attachments. I paused, confused. Photos? From what? Dawn and I weren't friends exactly, though we maintained a cordial professional relationship. She handled Richmond's complex calendar, managed his travel arrangements, and coordinated with my foundation when our schedules intersected. Efficient, professional, always perfectly dressed in conservative business attire. Not the type to send random photo messages. Curious, I opened the message thread. What I saw made my blood freeze in my veins. Photo after photo of crystal blue Mediterranean waters, Whitewashed buildings cascading down cliffsides, sunset dinners at romantic tavernas. Santorini, Greece. The vacation I'd been begging Richmond to take with me for 3 years, the one he always said we couldn't afford to take time away from the business for. But these weren't photos from a business trip. The first image showed Dawn in a flowing white sundress, arms wrapped around someone taking the selfie. The second revealed that someone was my husband, Richmond, looking more relaxed and happy than I'd seen him in years. His arm was around her waist possessively, his smile genuine and unguarded in a way that made my stomach lurch. Photo after photo told the story of their romantic Greek escape. Richmond feeding Dawn grapes at a vineyard, Dawn's legs across Richmond's lap on what appeared to be a private yacht, the two of them sharing wine at sunset, her hand resting intimately on his chest. A blurry photo clearly taken in a luxurious hotel room, showing scattered clothes and tangled sheets. But the most devastating image was the last one. Dawn wearing the diamond tennis bracelet I'd admired in Tiffany's window for our anniversary last month. The one Richmond said was too extravagant for our budget. The one I'd hinted about for weeks before finally accepting that we had more important priorities. Apparently, we did have important priorities. Just not the ones I thought. My hands shook as I scrolled back to the top of the message thread, trying to understand how this had happened. The message was clearly meant for someone else, a friend perhaps, or a family member Dawn was updating about her romantic getaway, but she'd somehow sent it to me instead. Dawn Kellison, Richmond's assistant, my husband's assistant, had accidentally sent me photographic evidence of their secret vacation affair. A vacation that had supposedly been a critical business development trip to London that I couldn't attend because of my foundation commitments. The London trip that had occurred just 2 weeks ago. The trip where Richmond had called me every evening, complaining about boring client dinners and promising to bring me back something special from Harrods. The trip where he'd been posting photos of foggy London streets to his LinkedIn, building the perfect alibi for a completely different reality. I stared at the photos, my perfectly organized world cracking like ice on a frozen lake. 15 years of marriage, 15 years of partnership, 15 years of building an empire together, and he was living a secret life in paradise with a woman young enough to be his daughter. The charity gala was tomorrow night, 300 guests. Richmond's keynote speech about business partnerships and integrity. The irony was so bitter I could taste it, but as I sat there in my foundation office, surrounded by 15 years of our shared achievements, a strange calm began to settle over me. Dawn had made a mistake, yes, but perhaps it was exactly the mistake that needed to happen. Tomorrow night, in front of Seattle's entire business community, Richmond would learn just how big a mistake it truly was. Everything about the Morrison empire was built on the foundation of what we called authentic partnership. That phrase had become our brand, our identity, the cornerstone of everything Richmond preached in his consulting practice. Clients paid Morrison's strategic consulting premium rates because they believed in the Morrison model, a marriage and business partnership so successful that it had created something legendary in Seattle's competitive consulting landscape. The irony now tasted like poison in my mouth. Let me paint you the picture of what 15 years of authentic partnership looked like from the outside, because until that Friday afternoon, I lived inside that picture completely. Our 8,000 square foot waterfront home was more than a residence. It was a statement. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Lake Washington, a gourmet kitchen where we hosted intimate dinners for potential clients, a home office where Richmond and I would strategize late into the night over wine and financial projections. The master bedroom featured a sitting area where we'd review foundation proposals together every Sunday morning, coffee in hand, Mount Rainier visible through the skylight above our custom California king bed. Every room told the story of our joint success. The dining room showcased photos from our travels to client sites across the country. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The living room displayed awards from the Seattle Chamber of Commerce, including Business Couple of the Year from 3 years running. Even the guest bathrooms featured framed articles about our charitable work and business achievements. Richmond had insisted on the professional photography for our home office, the one featured in Architectural Digest's Power Couples at Home spread last year. The camera captured us reviewing documents together, him leaning over my shoulder as I pointed to something on my laptop screen, both of us laughing at some shared insight. The photographer had spent 3 hours getting that candid moment perfect. Looking back, I realize how much energy we'd invested in performing our partnership for the world, and how much I'd believed in the performance myself. Morrison Strategic Consulting wasn't just Richmond's company, it was ours. My name appeared on the founding documents. My inheritance had funded the first 2 years of operations. My connections through my family's old money Seattle networks had secured our first major clients. When Boeing needed consulting on their supplier diversity initiative, they called us because of my relationship with their board member, George Whitfield, my father's college roommate. I'd spent countless evenings entertaining potential clients' wives while Richmond pitched their husbands. I'd organized the company retreats, managed the human resources challenges, and personally recruited 3 of our top consultants from my graduate school network. When Forbes featured Richmond as one of the top 40 under 40 consultants in America, the article mentioned how his brilliant partnership with wife Beverly had been instrumental to his success. The Morrison Foundation wasn't a side project. It was our joint legacy. Every year, we'd decide together which causes to support, which galas to sponsor, which board positions I should accept to maximize our impact and visibility. Richmond always said the foundation was my domain, but in reality, every major decision required his approval because our personal finances and business finances were so intertwined. $3 million donated over 5 years. 15 scholarships annually for low-income students. Partnership with Seattle Public Schools on their STEM initiative. My photograph appeared in the Seattle Times at least monthly, cutting ribbons, presenting oversized checks, or speaking at educational forums. Always with Richmond beside me, his hand protectively on my back, both of us smiling the practiced smile of Seattle's power couple. Our calendar was a carefully orchestrated symphony of business development and social positioning. Monday night dinners with potential clients, Wednesday evening networking events at the Seattle Art Museum, Friday afternoon coffee meetings with other foundation leaders, Saturday morning tennis with venture capitalists at the Rainier Club, Sunday brunch with tech executives at our favorite Capitol Hill restaurant. Every interaction served multiple purposes. Every conversation was potential business development. Every social connection strengthened our position in Seattle's tight-knit business community. I'd become an expert at the delicate social choreography required to maintain our status. I knew which wine to serve to impress the Amazon executives, which restaurant to suggest for courting the Microsoft team, which charity auction would position us alongside the tech billionaires' wives. My closet was organized by function, client, dinners, foundation events, casual networking, formal galas. Richmond and I moved through Seattle's elite social circles like professional dancers, each of us knowing our role perfectly. He'd charm the men with business insights and golf stories. I'd cultivate the women with shared interests in art, education, and charitable giving. Together, we were formidable. The Seattle Business Journal had dubbed us the couple most likely to know someone who knows someone in their annual networking power rankings. We weren't just successful, we were connected, influential, trusted. But beyond the public facade, I'd believed in the private reality of our partnership. Richmond and I genuinely enjoyed each other's company. We'd spend hours discussing business, strategy, debating political developments, planning our future expansion into Portland and San Francisco markets. He valued my insights, sought my opinion on major decisions, and credited me publicly for our shared success. Our physical relationship had evolved into comfortable intimacy. We'd make love twice a week, usually Sunday mornings and Wednesday evenings, with the practiced rhythm of a 15-year marriage. Richmond was attentive, affectionate, and seemed genuinely satisfied with our life together. We'd developed our own private jokes, our own shorthand for communicating across crowded rooms, our own traditions that no one else understood. Every anniversary, we'd return to the tiny Capitol Hill restaurant where we'd had our first business meeting, back when Morrison Strategic Consulting was just an idea, and I was the graduate student with family connections who might be able to help. Richmond would always order the same wine, a 2005 Chateau Margaux, and toast to authentic partnership. I'd respond, to building something that lasts. 15 years of the same toast, the same wine, the same conviction that we were creating something rare and valuable together. That's what made Dawn's accidental photo message so devastating. It wasn't just discovering an affair. It was realizing that everything I'd believed about our partnership, our connection, our shared vision, had been an elaborate performance designed to serve Richmond's ambitions. The perfect facade hadn't just hidden his betrayal. It had hidden the fact that I'd become a supporting character in my own life story. Tomorrow night's gala would change that forever. For 10 minutes after opening Dawn's message, I sat frozen, in my foundation office chair, staring at my phone screen as if the images might somehow rearrange themselves into something less devastating. The Seattle skyline stretched beyond my window, the Space Needle, Elliott Bay, the Olympic Mountains in the distance. But everything looked different now, like viewing a familiar landscape through fractured glass. My first instinct was denial. There had to be an explanation. Richmond wouldn't do this. Not Richmond, who quoted Maya Angelou at our wedding. When people show you who they are, believe them the first time. Not Richmond, who'd held me while I cried after my father's funeral, and promised we'd face everything together. Not Richmond, who still brought me coffee in bed every Sunday morning and asked about my dreams from the night before. But the photos didn't lie. I scrolled through the images again, this time forcing myself to study details rather than absorb. The emotional impact. The timestamp on the first photo. September 15th, 2:47 p.m. That would have been a Tuesday. According to Richmond's calendar, which I had access to through our shared business systems, he'd been in client meetings in London that entire week. The geolocation data on the photos told a different story. Santorini, Greece. Specifically, the Katikis Hotel, which I recognized from the distinctive infinity pool in several shots. I'd bookmarked that exact hotel on my Pinterest board titled Dream Destinations 2 years ago when I was trying to convince Richmond we needed a real vacation. Too expensive, he'd said then. Maybe when the Portland office is more established, they'll buy. Portland office that was now generating $2 million in annual revenue. I opened my laptop and accessed our joint credit card accounts, something I rarely did since Richmond handled most of our financial management. My fingers trembled as I typed in the password, Morrison 2009, the year we'd incorporated the business. The September statements revealed the truth in stark black and white. Charges from Katiki's Hotel, $4,147 for a 3-night stay in their premium suite. Aegean Airlines, $3,200 for 2 business class tickets to Athens. Santorini wine tours, $680. Dimitri's Taverna, $340. A jewelry store in Oya, $2,847, $2,747 for jewelry. The exact amount I'd calculated for the Tiffany tennis bracelet I'd been admiring. But here's what made my blood run cold. These weren't charges on Richmond's personal credit card, or even his business card. They were on our Morrison Foundation account, the charitable organization's credit card that was supposed to fund scholarships and educational programs for underprivileged children. Richmond hadn't just cheated on me. He'd stolen from Charity to do it. With shaking hands, I opened Richmond's LinkedIn profile. There it was, his carefully curated London business trip documentation. Photos of Big Ben, the Thames, traditional English pubs. Posts about productive meetings with European partners and exploring opportunities for international expansion. But I'd lived with Richmond for 15 years. I knew his tells, his habits, his patterns. The London photos were all tourist shots, the kind you could find on any travel website. None showed him with actual business associates. None featured the inside of offices or conference rooms. The few selfies were clearly taken with a timer, not by colleagues. I cross-referenced the timestamps. While he was posting photos of London's financial district at 2 p.m. GMT on September 15th, Dawn was photographing him feeding her grapes at a Santorini vineyard at the exact same moment. Richmond had created an elaborate social media alibi while living a completely different reality. The memories came flooding back now, tainted by new understanding. Richmond's nightly calls from London suddenly made perfect sense. The 7-hour time difference between Seattle and Greece was only 1 hour different from London. The client dinner that ran late every night wasn't a business obligation. It was romantic dinners with Dawn while I sat at home, missing him, planning our charity gala. I remembered Tuesday night's conversation particularly clearly now. He'd called around 8 p.m. my time, claiming he was exhausted from a long day of presentations. "How was your day, sweetheart?" he'd asked, and I'd told him about the venue final walkthrough, the last-minute catering changes, my excitement about the auction items we'd secured. "You work too hard," he'd said, his voice warm with what I'd interpreted as loving concern. "Promise me you'll take a break this weekend." In the background, I'd heard what sounded like waves and distant music. "Where are you calling from?" I'd asked. "Hotel bar," he'd said smoothly, trying to wind down. London's been brutal. The waves I'd heard weren't the Thames. They were the Aegean Sea lapping against the Katikis Hotel's infinity pool, where Dawn was probably waiting for him to return, from his fake check-in call to his wife. I accessed Richmond's business calendar through our shared systems, something I did regularly to coordinate foundation events around his schedule. The London trip was meticulously documented. Morrison UK expansion planning, Whitmore financial consultation, Thames Valley strategy session. But when I clicked on the individual calendar entries, they contained no actual details. No meeting, locations, no contact information, no follow-up tasks. For someone as obsessively detailed as Richmond, this was completely out of character. His normal calendar entries included specific addresses, agenda items, and post-meeting action plans. The London calendar was a shell, a facade designed to satisfy a casual glance, but containing no substance whatsoever. As I sat in my office, the late afternoon Seattle sun casting long shadows across my desk, I realized this couldn't be Dawn's first mistake. You don't accidentally send dozens of intimate vacation photos to your boss's wife. That level of carelessness suggested comfort, familiarity, a relationship that had moved beyond the careful boundaries of a new affair. How long had this been going on? The Santorini trip was clearly not their first romantic getaway. The ease with which they posed together, the intimate familiarity in their body language, suggested months of practice. I thought about Dawn's behavior over the past 18 months, the late nights when she'd stay to help Richmond with urgent projects, the weekend work sessions at our house when I'd served them coffee and homemade pastries while they huddled over laptops in our home office, the way she'd started dressing more stylishly, her conservative business attire gradually giving way to designer pieces that seemed expensive for an assistant's salary. Had they been laughing at me? The naive wife serving refreshments to her husband's mistress? My phone buzzed with another message. This time it was Richmond. "Running late tonight. Don't wait up. Big presentation tomorrow. Tomorrow. The charity gala. His keynote speech about integrity and business partnerships. I stared at the message, then back at the Santorini photos still glowing on my laptop screen. Dawn in my husband's arms. Dawn wearing jewelry purchased with charity funds. Dawn living the romantic vacation I'd been begging for while I worked 18-hour days organizing events to honor our authentic partnership. For 15 years, I'd been the supporting character in Richmond's success story. The devoted wife, the charitable foundation manager, the perfect social hostess who enhanced his reputation and opened doors through her family connections. But, looking at these photos, I realized something with crystal clarity. I wasn't just the supporting character in his professional life. I was the mark in his personal con game. Tomorrow night, that would change. 300 of Seattle's most influential business leaders would gather to celebrate partnerships and progress. Richmond would stand at that podium, talking about integrity and authentic collaboration, while his mistress sat in the audience, probably wearing more jewelry purchased with stolen charity funds. But first, I had work to do. If Richmond wanted to play elaborate games with carefully constructed alibis and social media deception, he was about to learn that 15 years of marriage had taught me a few things about strategy too. I opened a new browser window and began researching everything I could find about Dawn Kellison. If she was going to make mistakes, I was going to make sure they were much bigger than accidentally sending photos. What I discovered over the next 3 hours of methodical investigation made Dawn's accidental photo message look like a minor oversight compared to the systematic deception I was about to uncover. I'd always prided myself on being detail-oriented, a skill that made me an effective foundation director and event planner. Now I was about to put those same analytical abilities to work as a detective in my own marriage. I started with what I had access to: our shared business systems, joint financial accounts, and Richmond's surprisingly careless digital footprint. 15 years of marriage had given me legitimate access to most of our integrated technology systems, and Richmond's confidence in my loyalty had made him sloppy about digital security. His laptop was still logged into our home wireless network from his last working session in our study. I accessed our cloud storage account, ostensibly to review foundation documents, but instead began systematically examining Richmond's travel patterns over the past 18 months. The first red flag appeared immediately: a pattern of business trips that coincided perfectly with Dawn's vacation requests. Cross-referencing her employment records, which I had access to as foundation director reviewing company integration, I discovered that every one of Dawn's personal days aligned with Richmond's critical client meetings in various cities. March. Dawn requested 4 personal days. Richmond flew to Portland Client Intensive. May. Dawn took a long weekend. Richmond attended Vancouver Partnership Summit. July. Dawn used 5 vacation days. Richmond spent a week at San Francisco Strategy Retreat. September. Dawn's Greece vacation request. Richmond's London business development trip. But the travel correlation was just the beginning. The financial evidence was far more damning and complex than I'd initially realized. Richmond hadn't just used foundation funds for the Santorini trip. He'd been systematically embezzling money for over a year. Our foundation operated with a discretionary fund for emergency educational opportunities, grants we could approve quickly for time-sensitive student needs. The fund typically maintained a balance of $50,000, replenished quarterly from our major donor contributions. Richmond had been making unauthorized withdrawals from this fund, disguising them as educational grants to fictitious organizations. Seattle Youth Leadership Development received $15,000 in March. The same month, he and Dawn traveled to Portland. Pacific Northwest Student Excellence Initiative was awarded $12,000 in July, precisely the cost of their San Francisco getaway. The fictitious organizations were sophisticated forgeries. Richmond had created fake websites, registered domain names, and established bank accounts that looked legitimate on cursory inspection. But when I dug deeper, every organization traced back to a single registered agent, Emmett Vance Consulting, a business entity I'd never heard of, but that was clearly connected to Richmond. Armed with Richmond's travel schedule and Dawn's vacation requests, I began calling hotels directly. I'd learned from 15 years of event planning that hospitality staff often remembered unusual guest situations, especially when charm and persistence were applied correctly. The Nantucket Beach Resort confirmed that Mr. and Mrs. Morrison had stayed in their presidential suite in March. Except Mrs. Morrison wasn't me. The description matched Dawn perfectly. Young, blonde, approximately 26 years old, very affectionate with Mr. Morrison. The Four Seasons Vancouver verified a similar booking in May. The Ritz-Carlton San Francisco had records of an extended stay in July, complete with spa treatments, charged to the room and romantic dinner reservations for two. Each hotel detail painted the same picture. Richmond wasn't just having an affair with Dawn, he was introducing her as his wife, creating an alternate reality where their relationship was legitimate and established. Richmond's LinkedIn profile told one story, but Dawn's Instagram account, which I accessed through mutual business connections, revealed another. While Richmond posted carefully curated business content, Dawn's personal account showed glimpses of luxury experiences that far exceeded her assistant's salary. Designer handbags photographed in upscale restaurants, wine tastings at exclusive venues, weekend getaways to expensive resorts, and tellingly, several photos where a masculine hand or partial figure appeared in frame, always cropped to avoid revealing the man's identity. But the watch, the wedding, ring, the familiar sleeve of Richmond's favorite jacket were unmistakable. Dawn had been documenting their entire relationship on social media, just carefully enough to avoid direct identification, but obviously enough that anyone looking would understand she was involved with someone wealthy and established. I called Morrison Strategic Consulting's office manager, Mila Torres, under the pretense of coordinating next week's foundation board meeting. Mila had worked for the company for 8 years and was famously observant about office dynamics. "Oh, Beverly, I'm so glad you called," Mila said immediately. "I've been wanting to talk to someone about some concerns." My heart stopped. "What kind of concerns?" "Well, it's probably nothing, but Dawn's been different lately. More confident, I suppose. She's been making decisions about Richmond's calendar that she never used to make, and she's been quite resistant when I've tried to coordinate with you directly about his schedule," Mila continued, her voice dropping conspiratorially. "And there have been some unusual expense reports. Travel costs that don't quite add up, restaurant bills for two when Richmond claims to have been dining alone with clients. I processed the company credit card statements, and some of these charges are questionable." By 8 p.m. that Friday evening, I'd assembled a comprehensive picture of systematic betrayal that went far beyond a simple affair. Richmond and Dawn had been operating as if they were married, using my foundation's funds to finance their parallel life while I unknowingly provided the perfect cover story. Richmond's business trips weren't just alibis for romance. They were elaborate fantasy getaways where he could play house with his young mistress, introducing her as his wife and using stolen charity money to fund their luxury lifestyle. But perhaps most devastating was realizing how long this had been going on. 18 months of calculated deception. 18 months of me organizing charity events, managing foundation business, and hosting client dinners while my husband built an entire alternate life with his assistant. Tomorrow night, 300 of Seattle's business elite would gather to celebrate partnerships and progress. Richmond would deliver his keynote about integrity in business relationships. Dawn would likely attend as his professional assistant, playing her role perfectly while knowing they'd share a hotel room afterward using foundation funds. But I had something they didn't know I possessed: complete documentation of their fraud, evidence of their systematic theft from charitable funds, and most importantly, access to the same audio-visual technology that would broadcast Richmond's speech about partnership integrity to the entire assembled audience. Dawn's accidental photo message had been a mistake, but I was about to turn it into the catalyst for the most spectacular public accounting of deception Seattle's business community had ever witnessed. By 11 p.m. that Friday night, I'd uncovered a web of deception so intricate and systematic that it made me question everything I thought I knew about my husband's character. What had started as investigating one suspicious vacation had evolved into documenting an 18-month campaign of financial fraud, identity theft, and elaborate relationship manipulation that reached far beyond a simple affair. Spread across my dining room table were printed bank statements, credit card records, travel confirmations, and screenshots that painted a disturbing picture of calculated betrayal. Using colored highlighters, yellow for financial fraud, pink for travel deception, blue for fake business activities, I'd created a timeline that revealed the true scope of Richmond and Dawn's operation. January 2023. The first suspicious charge appeared. Educational Excellence Northwest received a $8,000 grant from our foundation's emergency fund. The organization's website looked legitimate, but listed no physical address, no staff directory, and no actual programs. The bank account for this fictitious charity traced back to an account controlled by Emmett Vance Consulting, Richmond's shell company. February 2023. Dawn received her first performance bonus, a $15,000 payment that supposedly rewarded her exceptional organizational skills. The same week, Richmond booked their first romantic getaway to Victoria, Canada, using foundation funds disguised as a cross-border business development initiative. March through September 2023. The pattern accelerated. Every 6 to 8 weeks, a new fake charity would receive a substantial grant, ranging from $10,000 to $25,000. Within days, Richmond and Dawn would embark on another business trip to luxury destinations across North America and Europe. The financial sophistication was impressive and terrifying. Richmond hadn't just stolen money, he'd created an entire parallel accounting system that could withstand casual scrutiny while systematically embezzling over $180,000 from charitable funds intended for disadvantaged students. But the financial fraud was only part of the story. My investigation revealed that Richmond and Dawn had been living as husband and wife during their travels, complete with fake identification and carefully constructed backstories. Dawn's Instagram posts, when examined chronologically, showed her gradually adopting elements of my identity. She'd started wearing her hair in my signature style. Her clothing choices began mirroring my aesthetic preferences. Most disturbingly, she'd been photographed wearing replicas of jewelry Richmond had given me during our early marriage years. Pieces she couldn't possibly afford on her assistant's salary. The hotel registrations told an even more chilling story. At each destination, they'd checked in as Mr. and Mrs. Morrison, with Dawn using a fake ID that listed her as Beverly Morrison. Richmond had somehow obtained fraudulent identification documents that allowed his mistress to literally assume my identity while they played house across the country. During their San Francisco trip in July, they'd attended a charity auction at the Museum of Modern Art as the Morrisons, bidding on expensive artwork and socializing with other wealthy couples. Dawn had worn a dress identical to one I'd worn to a Seattle charity event the previous year, styled her hair exactly like mine, and even adopted my mannerisms based on the event photos I found on the museum's social media accounts. They weren't just having an affair. Richmond was systematically replacing me with a younger version while using my own foundation's money to finance the transition. The investigation revealed that Richmond's business trips weren't random romantic getaways. They were strategic networking, opportunities where he was positioning Dawn as his wife to potential clients and business partners. He'd been using our charitable foundation's reputation and my family's social connections to expand his business network while simultaneously planning my replacement. In Vancouver, they'd attended a private equity conference where Richmond introduced Dawn as his business partner and wife to several potential investors. The conference materials listed Mr. and Mrs. Morrison as attendees, with Dawn's bio describing her as co-founder of Morrison Foundation and strategic development specialist. In Portland, they'd met with clients from our established business network, people who knew me personally. Richmond had apparently explained my absence by claiming I was focusing on expanding our East Coast operations, while Dawn charmed these clients with detailed knowledge about our foundation's work and business history. The most devastating discovery was an email thread I found in Richmond's encrypted folder between him and Gavin Richards, a major client. From our Portland office, Richards had written, "Beverly seems different, more energetic and engaged. The foundation work clearly agrees with her. We should schedule a formal dinner when we're in Seattle next month." Gavin Richards, who'd attended our wedding 12 years ago, who'd had dinner at our house numerous times, who'd known me for over a decade, had spent an entire evening with Dawn thinking she was me, and noticed only that I seemed more energetic. Perhaps. Most disturbing was realizing how Richmond had been psychologically preparing me for my own replacement. Over the past 18 months, he'd been subtly undermining my confidence while encouraging Dawn to adopt my professional responsibilities. Richmond had gradually redirected foundation communications through Dawn, claiming it was more efficient for her to handle routine correspondence. He'd suggested that I was overworked and should delegate more responsibilities to her. He'd praised Dawn's initiative while subtly criticizing my attention to detail, my event planning choices, and my social networking strategies. Looking back, with new understanding, I realized Richmond had been gaslighting me into believing I was becoming less competent, less relevant, less necessary to our foundation's operations. While I'd been questioning my own abilities, Dawn had been systematically learning my job, my social connections, and even my personal style. The timeline revealed that Richmond's plan was nearing completion. Based on the financial transfers and business communications I'd discovered, he intended to officially replace me as foundation director within the next 6 months, installing Dawn in my position while maintaining access to the charitable funds and social connections that had made our embezzlement scheme possible. Tomorrow night's charity gala wasn't just another social event. It was supposed to be Dawn's official debut as the new Mrs. Morrison, with me potentially being phased out of the foundation and social circle I'd spent 15 years building. But Richmond had made one critical miscalculation. He'd assumed that 15 years of marriage had made me passive, trusting, and dependent on his leadership. He'd underestimated what 15 years of event planning, foundation management, and social networking had taught me about strategy, coordination, and public presentation. Tomorrow night, 300 of Seattle's business elite would indeed witness the debut of the real Mrs. Morrison, just not the one Richmond was expecting. I sat in my darkened home office at 2 a.m., surrounded by the evidence of my husband's systematic betrayal, and felt something profound shift inside me. It wasn't the heartbreak I'd expected, though that pain was certainly there, sharp and constant like a broken rib. It wasn't even the rage that had fueled my investigation for the past 8 hours. What I felt was something much more dangerous. To Richmond's carefully constructed world, absolute clarity. For 15 years, I'd been living inside a beautiful lie. The devoted husband who brought me coffee every morning had been calculating each gesture for maximum manipulation. The business partner who valued my insights had been systematically undermining my confidence while training my replacement. The man who'd promised to build something lasting together had been planning my disposal from the moment his alternate plan became viable. But the most devastating realization wasn't about Richmond's betrayal. It was about my own complicity in my diminishment. I'd been so invested in maintaining our perfect image that I'd ignored every warning sign, rationalized every inconsistency, and gradually accepted a smaller and smaller role in my own life. When had I stopped questioning Richmond's decisions? When had I started seeking his approval for choices I used to make independently? When had I begun believing his subtle criticisms about my judgment, my social skills, my professional competence? The evidence spread across my desk told the story of a woman being slowly erased from her own existence. Every foundation decision increasingly routed through Dawn. Every social engagement gradually shifted to prioritize Richmond's networking over my established relationships. Every financial choice designed to increase my dependence on his business success. I'd been so busy being the perfect wife that I'd forgotten to be myself. But 15 years of marriage to a master manipulator had taught me something Richmond never intended. I'd learned his methods by osmosis. Event planning had honed my attention to detail, foundation management had taught me financial oversight, and social networking had made me an expert at reading people and situations. Now I was going to use every skill he'd helped me develop to destroy the empire we'd built together. The beauty of Richmond's plan was also its fatal flaw. He'd been so methodical, so documented, so confident in his control, that he'd created a perfect paper trail of his own destruction. Every fake charity, every fraudulent expense report, every stolen dollar was meticulously recorded in systems I had legitimate access to. Tomorrow night's charity gala wasn't just a social event. It was the perfect stage for Richmond's public destruction. 300 of Seattle's most influential business leaders, gathered to celebrate integrity and partnership, would witness the most spectacular exposure of corporate fraud in the city's recent history. But before I could execute any plan for Richmond's public humiliation, I had to confront a more personal truth. I was terrified of losing the identity I'd built around being his wife. Mrs. Richmond Morrison commanded respect in Seattle's social circles. Beverly Morrison, foundation director, had credibility and influence. But who was Beverly without the Morrison empire? Who was I before I became half of Seattle's golden power couple? I walked through our Mercer Island mansion in the pre-dawn darkness, seeing it now as the stage set it had always been. The professional photography in the home office captured a performance, not a partnership. The awards and accolades on display celebrated a fiction, not an achievement. The carefully curated rooms showcased a lifestyle designed to impress rather than a home designed to nurture. Even our bedroom felt foreign now. The California king bed, where Richmond had made love to me twice a week with practiced efficiency while saving his passion for his young mistress. The sitting area where we'd reviewed foundation proposals while he secretly planned to replace me with Dawn. The walk-in closet filled with clothes chosen to complement his public image rather than express my personal style. I'd been performing the role of Richmond's wife so successfully that I'd lost track of who Beverly actually was underneath the performance. Standing in our kitchen at 3 a.m., making coffee in the French press Richmond had bought because it matched our aesthetic, I made a decision that would change everything. I was done performing. Tomorrow night, I would give Seattle's business community the most authentic performance of my life. The revelation of who Richmond Morrison really was. But more importantly, I would begin the process of discovering who Beverly really was underneath 15 years of careful image management. I opened my laptop and began drafting a different kind of plan. Not just the public exposure of Richmond's fraud, but the strategic dismantling of everything that had made his deception possible. If he wanted to replace me, he was welcome to try. But he would do it without access to my family's money, my social connections, or the foundation I'd built with my own reputation and relationships. The Morrison empire had been built on the foundation of my inheritance, my social networks, and my family's credibility. Richmond had been so focused on stealing foundation funds and training Dawn to mimic my social role that he'd forgotten a crucial detail. The empire's true foundation belonged to me, not him. By dawn, I drafted a comprehensive strategy that went far beyond exposing Richmond's affair. I would systematically reclaim every asset, every relationship, and every opportunity he'd appropriated for his parallel life with Dawn. The legal dissolution of our marriage would be swift and financially devastating for him. The professional consequences would end his consulting career. The social humiliation would ensure he could never rebuild his reputation in Seattle's tight-knit business community. But first, there was tonight's gala to prepare for. I showered and dressed with the same meticulous attention to detail I'd applied to 15 years of public appearances as Richmond's wife. But this time, every choice was authentic to who I was discovering myself to be. The dress I selected wasn't chosen to complement Richmond's image. It was chosen to project my own power and independence. The jewelry I wore wasn't gifted by my husband. It was inherited from my grandmother, symbols of female strength that predated my marriage. As I prepared for what would be my final performance as Mrs. Richmond Morrison, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Excitement about my own future. Not our future, not the Morrison Empire's future, but mine. Richmond was about to learn that the woman he'd been systematically underestimating for 18 months was far more dangerous than the naive wife he'd been planning to discard. Saturday. Morning arrived with the crystalline clarity that only comes after a sleepless night of complete revelation. I sat in my home office, coffee growing cold as I methodically planned what would either be the most spectacular vindication or the most catastrophic mistake of my life. The charity gala was 12 hours away, and I had work to do. First, I needed to understand the Fairmont Olympic Hotel's audiovisual capabilities. I'd coordinated with their events team dozens of times over the years, but tonight required a more intimate knowledge of their systems. I called Marcus Webb, the hotel's senior AV technician, someone I'd worked with on multiple foundation events. "Beverly, looking forward to tonight's gala," Marcus said cheerfully. "Everything's set up exactly as you specified. The 85-inch 4K displays, the wireless presentation system, the backup projectors. Your husband's keynote should look spectacular." "Marcus, I need to ask a technical question," I said carefully. "How exactly does the wireless presentation system work? Could someone theoretically override the main presentation from a mobile device?" "Well, yes, if they have the admin credentials. The system's designed for flexibility. Multiple presenters can queue up content, and the primary administrator can control what displays when. You have the admin access codes since you're the event coordinator. Perfect. And these displays, they're connected to the ballroom's main sound system?" "Absolutely. Full audio-visual integration. Whatever appears on screen will have synchronized audio if there's any embedded in the content." I thanked Marcus and hung up, making notes about the presentation system's capabilities. Richmond's keynote about integrity in business partnerships would be delivered through a microphone connected to speakers that could reach every corner of the grand ballroom. The irony was so perfect it felt like destiny. Next, I spent 3 hours creating a comprehensive digital presentation of Richmond and Dawn's fraud. Not just the Santorini photos that had started this investigation, but the complete timeline of their deception. Bank statements showing the fraudulent charity, transfers, hotel receipts documenting their travels as Mr. and Mrs. Morrison, screenshots of Dawn's Instagram posts wearing replicas of my jewelry, images from charity events where Dawn had literally impersonated me. But the centerpiece would be a recorded video I'd discovered on Richmond's laptop, a private moment from their San Francisco trip where Dawn was modeling the diamond tennis bracelet I'd been denied, while Richmond explained how he'd convinced his naive wife that it was too expensive for their budget. The audio was crystal clear, including Richmond's laugh as he described how easily I believed his financial constraints while he funded their luxury lifestyle with stolen charity money. I organized everything into a 20-minute presentation that told the complete story of their systematic betrayal. The evidence was so comprehensive, so undeniably documented, that even Richmond's considerable charm couldn't explain it away. While working on the presentation, I called Sonia Martinez, the most ruthless divorce attorney in Seattle. Her reputation for destroying unfaithful husbands in high-profile divorces was legendary, and I wanted her locked in before Richmond realized he needed legal representation. "I've been expecting your call," Sonia said when I reached her at home. "Word travels fast in our circles, and Richmond's recent behavior has been noticeable." "What do you mean?" I asked, though I suspected I knew. "He's been asking colleagues about asset protection strategies, offshore accounts, business dissolution procedures, the kind of questions that suggest someone's preparing for a contentious divorce. He's been planning this exit for months, Beverly." The confirmation that Richmond had been strategically preparing to abandon our marriage while I planned charity events was almost liberating. No more guilt about destroying his reputation. No more hesitation about the nuclear option I was contemplating. "Sonia," and I spent an hour reviewing the evidence I'd compiled. The embezzlement charges alone would be enough to destroy him professionally and financially, but combined with identity fraud, tax evasion, and breach of fiduciary duty, Richmond was looking at potential criminal charges that could result in years of prison time. The guest list for tonight's gala read like Seattle's business and social elite directory. 300 of the most influential people in the Pacific Northwest, including venture capitalists, tech executives, media personalities, and political leaders. The kind of crowd that could make or break reputations with a single conversation. I carefully reviewed the seating arrangements I'd meticulously planned months ago. Richmond's keynote would be delivered from the main stage, with premium tables arranged in a semicircle for maximum impact. The Morrison Foundation's board members were seated at the head table, including my family members who'd been instrumental in providing the seed funding Richmond had been embezzling. Dawn would be seated at table 12, positioned perfectly, for the cameras that would be recording Richmond's speech for the Foundation's website and social media accounts. She'd have a clear view of the presentation screens and would be visible to the entire ballroom when the truth was revealed. But perhaps most importantly, I spent time preparing myself psychologically for what was about to happen. This wasn't just exposing Richmond's fraud. It was publicly destroying the life I'd spent 15 years building. The Morrison empire, our social standing, our charitable reputation, everything would be obliterated along with Richmond's deception. I called my closest friend, someone who'd known me since college and had occasionally questioned Richmond's treatment of me over the years. Without revealing my plans, I asked her to attend tonight's gala and to please stay close afterward, regardless of what happened. I also drafted letters to the Morrison Foundation's major donors, explaining the situation, and my plan to establish a new charitable organization once the legal issues were resolved. I wouldn't let Richmond's fraud destroy the good work we'd accomplished for disadvantaged students, even if it meant starting over from scratch. As afternoon approached, I made final preparations for what would be the last public appearance of Mr. and Mrs. Richmond Morrison. I'd chosen my outfit carefully, the midnight blue Valentino dress I'd worn to our 10th anniversary celebration, back when I still believed we were building something beautiful together. Tonight, it would serve as a farewell to the woman I'd been, and a debut for who I was becoming. The presentation was loaded onto my phone, ready to upload to the hotel's wireless system at the precise moment Richmond began speaking about integrity and authentic partnerships. The legal documents were prepared for filing Monday morning. The evidence was organized for immediate delivery to law enforcement. Richmond had spent 18 months methodically planning my replacement and disposal. Tonight, I would show him what 15 years of underestimating me had cost him. In 6 hours, Seattle's business elite would witness either the most spectacular vindication or the most catastrophic implosion in the city's social history. But for the first time in years, I wasn't afraid of the outcome. Whatever happened next, it would be authentically mine. The Fairmont Olympic Hotel's grand ballroom had never looked more magnificent, and I'd never felt more dangerous. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over tables draped in ivory linens, each centerpiece a perfect arrangement of white orchids and eucalyptus that I'd personally approved months ago. 300 of Seattle's most influential business leaders mingled with champagne flutes, their conversations creating the sophisticated buzz of successful people celebrating success. But tonight, success would have a very different definition. I stood near the entrance in my midnight blue Valentino dress, greeting guests with the practiced smile I'd perfected over 15 years of charity events. To everyone present, I was simply Beverly Morrison, the gracious foundation director hosting another flawless gala. They had no idea they were about to witness the most spectacular public destruction of a marriage in Seattle's social history. "Beverly, darling, everything looks absolutely perfect," gushed Margaret Whitfield, the wife of Boeing's board member who'd been instrumental in our early business development. Her diamond necklace caught the light as she gestured toward the elegant room setup. "Richmond must be so proud of what you've accomplished with the foundation." "Thank you, Margaret. Richmond certainly appreciates partnership," I replied, the irony tasting bitter on my tongue as I watched my husband across the room, completely unaware that his perfect wife had spent the last 36 hours becoming his most dangerous enemy. Speaking of which, he should be beginning his keynote soon. Across the ballroom, I spotted Dawn at table 12, wearing a black, cocktail dress that looked suspiciously similar to one I'd worn to last year's museum gala. She was chatting animatedly with Seattle Tech Council members, playing her role as Richmond's professional assistant while secretly being his personal mistress and criminal partner. Her confidence was remarkable. 18 months of stealing. My husband, my identity, and my foundation's money had given her quite the sense of security. She had no idea that every person she was charming tonight would soon see her vacation photos with my husband, purchased with money stolen from children's education funds. Richmond stood near the head table, working the room with his trademark charisma. He looked distinguished in his custom tuxedo, every inch the successful CEO that Seattle's business community admired. His silver cufflinks, a gift from my family when he made partner, gleamed as he gestured while speaking to venture capitalists about authentic business partnerships. He caught my eye across the room and smiled, raising his champagne flute in a small salute to our partnership, the same smile he'd given me every morning for 15 years while planning my systematic replacement. The same charm he'd used to convince me I was overreacting to his increasingly suspicious behavior. If only he knew that his devoted wife had spent the last 36 hours transforming into the person who would destroy everything he'd built, through 15 years of calculated manipulation. "Ladies and gentlemen," the hotel's events coordinator announced through the discreet wireless microphone system I'd personally specified during planning, "please take your seats. Mr. Richmond Morrison will begin his keynote address in 5 minutes." The announcement triggered a wave of movement across the ballroom as 300 guests made their way to their assigned tables. I'd spent weeks perfecting the seating arrangements, major donors near the front, media representatives strategically, positioned for optimal photography angles, and Dawn placed precisely where the cameras recording Richmond's speech would capture her reaction when her world exploded. I felt for my phone in my evening clutch, ensuring the presentation was ready to upload. My hands were surprisingly steady. 15 years of public speaking and event management had trained me well for moments of high pressure. But tonight was different. Tonight, I wasn't performing Richmond's version of Beverly Morrison. Tonight, I was about to reveal exactly who I really was underneath 15 years of careful image management. As guests settled into their seats, I made my way to the lighting booth where Marcus Webb was making final adjustments to the audio-visual system. The same system I'd coordinated the installation of 2 years ago, never imagining I'd someday use it to broadcast my husband's crimes to Seattle's entire business elite. "Everything ready for Mr. Morrison's presentation?" I asked, my voice casual, despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins. "Absolutely, Mrs. Morrison. The wireless system is active, and your admin credentials are loaded. The 85-inch displays are crystal clear. 4K resolution means every detail will be visible from anywhere in the ballroom. Whenever you're ready to begin the presentation, it'll display automatically on all screens." "Perfect. And Marcus?" "No matter. What happens during the presentation? Please don't interrupt the system until I give you the signal. He looked puzzled, but nodded. Of course, Mrs. Morrison. Whatever you need. I walked back toward the main ballroom, watching Richmond approach the podium as applause filled the space. He looked confident, relaxed, completely unaware that his wife was about to destroy everything he'd built through 15 years of calculated manipulation and criminal activity. The irony was so perfect it felt orchestrated by fate itself. Richmond Morrison, who'd built his career preaching about authentic partnerships while systematically betraying every principle the phrase represented, was about to be exposed by the very technology and event planning expertise his wife had developed to support his success. Good evening, everyone, Richmond began, his voice carrying clearly through the sound system I'd specified. Tonight, I want to talk to you about something that's been central to my success: the power of authentic partnership. I opened my phone and accessed the hotel's presentation system. One touch of the screen would replace Richmond's carefully prepared slides about business integrity with a comprehensive exhibition of his systematic fraud and betrayal. Richmond continued, his voice warm with practiced sincerity. True partnership requires transparency, mutual respect, and absolute trust. It demands that we hold ourselves accountable to the highest standards of integrity, especially when no one is watching. I touched the screen. The projector remote was about to slip from more than just Richmond's hands. His entire, carefully constructed world was about to shatter like champagne crystal on a ballroom floor. The first image that appeared on the ballroom's massive 85-inch screens was Dawn in her flowing white sundress, arms wrapped around Richmond on a cliff overlooking the crystalline waters of Santorini, both of them laughing with the carefree joy of lovers on a romantic holiday. The collective gasp from 300 guests was audible even over Richmond's amplified voice, which faltered mid-sentence about absolute trust. What the hell? Richmond spun toward the screens, his wireless presentation remote clattering, to the floor as his face drained of color. The confident CEO disappeared, replaced by a man who suddenly understood that his perfect control had just evaporated in front of Seattle's entire business elite. But I wasn't finished. I was just getting started. The second slide appeared with devastating clarity. Dawn wearing the diamond tennis bracelet I'd admired for months, the same bracelet Richmond had claimed we couldn't afford. Beside the image, the credit card statement showed the $2,147 purchase, charged to Morrison Foundation's charitable account intended for student scholarships. "Turn it off!" Richmond hissed into his microphone, his panic broadcasting to every corner of the ballroom. "Beverly, turn it off now!" The third slide was even more damning. Hotel receipts from their San Francisco getaway, showing a $3,200 charge to the Morrison Foundation for the presidential suite at the Ritz-Carlton. The same weekend, Richmond had told me he was visiting potential donors for our scholarship program. I remained standing near the lighting booth, watching 300 of Seattle's most influential people process what they were seeing in real time. Margaret Whitfield had her hand pressed to her chest in shock, her champagne flute forgotten on the table. The tech executives at Table 5 were already pulling out their phones to photograph the screens. Boeing's board members were exchanging horrified glances, understanding immediately what this meant for their business relationship with Morrison Strategic Consulting. Dawn had gone completely white, shrinking into her chair as if she could disappear from the ballroom entirely. But there was nowhere to hide from 85-inch screens displaying her intimate moments with my husband to 300 witnesses. The fourth slide was perhaps the most devastating. A video clip I'd discovered on Richmond's laptop from their San Francisco trip. Dawn modeling the stolen bracelet while Richmond's voice played through the ballroom's state-of-the-art sound system. My naive wife actually believed I couldn't afford it. She has no idea how much money flows through the foundation accounts. She's so trusting, it's almost pathetic. The silence in the ballroom was deafening. 300 people sat frozen, watching Richmond Morrison, Seattle's golden boy of consulting, the man who'd just been preaching about integrity and authentic partnerships, exposed as a systematic fraud and embezzler on the screens behind. Him. "This is taken out of context," Richmond shouted, abandoning the podium and striding toward me, his carefully modulated speaking voice replaced by desperate panic. "Beverly has had some emotional difficulties lately. This is a complete fabrication." But the evidence kept rolling, each slide more damning than the last. Bank statements showing 18 months of fraudulent charitable grants to fictitious organizations. Photos of Dawn and Richmond registered as Mr. and Mrs. Morrison at luxury hotels across the country. Screenshots of Dawn's Instagram posts documenting their lavish lifestyle funded by money stolen from disadvantaged students. Hotel security guards moved discreetly toward Richmond as he approached me, their presence a reminder that the Fairmont staff were trained to handle disruptions. But Richmond stopped short when he saw my expression. Calm, resolved, completely in control of a situation that was spiraling beyond his ability to manipulate. 15 years, I said, my voice carrying clearly across the nearby tables as guests strained to hear every word. 15 years of building this foundation to help disadvantaged students, and you've been stealing from them to fund your affair and criminal enterprise. The next slide appeared, a comprehensive financial summary showing that Richmond and Dawn had embezzled over $180,000 from the Morrison Foundation over 18 months, using the money to finance luxury vacations while posing as husband and wife, and building a money laundering operation that stretched across 3 states. Dawn bolted from her table, pushing through the stunned crowd toward the ballroom exit, her designer heels clicking frantically against the polished floor. But photographers from the Seattle Business Journal and local society magazines were already positioned near the doors, their cameras capturing every moment of her humiliated retreat. The woman who'd spent 18 months stealing my identity was about to become the most photographed scandal in Seattle social history. The audience erupted in a buzz of horrified conversations as the final slides continued displaying. Board members from multiple charitable organizations were pulling out phones to call their financial officers. Venture capitalists were already calculating the business implications of being associated with Richmond's firm. Social media was lighting up as guests live tweeted the most spectacular corporate fraud exposure in Pacific Northwest history. Richmond stood in the center of the ballroom, his carefully constructed reputation disintegrating in real time as 300 witnesses absorbed the full scope of his betrayal. The man who'd built his career on integrity and authentic partnerships had been exposed as a systematic criminal in the most public forum possible. Mayor Williams was already speaking quietly with his security detail, understanding that what we were witnessing wasn't just marital drama. It was documented corporate fraud that required immediate legal intervention. FBI agents would be called before the evening ended. The projector remote lay forgotten on the stage floor, but the damage was complete and irreversible. Seattle's business elite had witnessed the Morrison Empire's spectacular collapse, and there would be no recovering from this level of public humiliation and criminal exposure. As chaos erupted around us, I felt something I hadn't experienced in 15 years. Complete authenticity. For the first time since my wedding day, I wasn't performing a role or managing appearances. I was simply Beverly Morrison, finally telling the truth about who my husband really was. "You've destroyed everything," Richmond hissed as he reached me, his voice low but trembling with rage. The ballroom behind us buzzed with shocked conversations as guests struggled to process what they'd witnessed. 15 years of building this reputation, this business, this life, gone because of your jealous tantrum. I looked at him with the calm that comes from absolute moral clarity. "I destroyed nothing, Richmond. I simply revealed what you built it on. This is manipulation of evidence, selective editing. No one will believe." "The bank statements?" I interrupted, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins. "The hotel receipts? The video of you laughing about your naive wife while Dawn wore jewelry stolen from charity funds?" Which part would you like to claim is edited? Richmond's face contorted with the desperate expression of a cornered animal. You don't understand the pressure I've been under, the expectations, the constant need to maintain appearances. Dawn was just stress relief. It didn't mean anything. Stress relief that cost our foundation $180,000? Stress relief that required creating fake charities and fraudulent tax documents? I pulled out my phone and showed him screenshots of his encrypted emails. Or was discussing your exit strategy with divorce attorneys also just stress relief? His facade cracked completely. You went through my private communications? You violated my privacy? The hypocrisy was breathtaking. I violated your privacy? You stole my identity, Richmond. Dawn has been traveling as Beverly Morrison for 18 months, using fake identification you helped her obtain. She attended charity events as me, met with our business partners as me, built relationships with people who thought they were meeting your wife. That was never permanent, he said desperately. It was just easier for business purposes. You're being dramatic about… Dramatic? I stepped closer, my voice dropping to a whisper that somehow felt more dangerous than shouting. You systematically embezzled money from disadvantaged students to fund your affair. You psychologically manipulated me for 18 months, making me question my own competence while training my replacement. You planned to divorce me and steal everything I'd helped build. Which part of that should I respond to calmly? Around us, guests were beginning to approach, their faces a mixture of concern and morbid curiosity. I could see George Whitfield making his way through the crowd, his expression grim. As a board member of both Boeing and our foundation, he understood exactly what Richmond's fraud meant for our charitable operations. Beverly, Richmond tried one last manipulation, his voice softening into the tone he'd used to charm me for 15 years. We can fix this. We can explain that it was a temporary arrangement, that the money will be repaid. Dawn means nothing. To me. You're my wife, my partner. We built this together. I looked at this man I'd shared 15 years with and felt nothing but pity. No, Richmond. I built this. You just took credit for it while planning to steal it. George Whitfield reached us, his presence commanding immediate attention. Richmond, I think we need to have a conversation about your position with the foundation. Immediately. Behind him, I spotted 2 Seattle police officers entering the ballroom, summoned by someone who understood that what we'd witnessed wasn't just marital drama. It was documented corporate fraud, requiring immediate legal intervention. Richmond saw them too, and for the first time that evening, he looked genuinely afraid. 3 days after the gala, I sat in Sonia Martinez's law office with boxes of evidence that made Richmond's public humiliation look like a minor scandal compared to what we were about to uncover. The Seattle Police Department's Financial Crimes Unit had seized Richmond's computers, but not before I'd made comprehensive copies of everything during my Friday night investigation. Beverly, this is far worse than embezzlement, Sonia said, spreading documents across her conference table. What your husband created was a sophisticated money laundering operation using charitable organizations as a front. Detective Emmett Walsh from the Financial Crimes Unit leaned forward. We've traced the fake charities to a network of shell companies spanning 3 states. Richmond wasn't just stealing from your foundation. He was using it as a hub for washing money from other questionable sources. I stared at the evidence, feeling sick. What kind of sources? Offshore accounts, cryptocurrency transactions, payments from clients who were likely evading taxes, Detective Walsh explained. The Morrison Foundation's sterling reputation provided perfect cover for moving money that couldn't be cleaned through normal business channels. Sonia pulled out a thick folder. The worst part is how long this has been going on. We found evidence dating back 7 years, not 18 months. Richmond has been using your foundation's credibility to legitimize illegal financial activities for most of your marriage. 7 years? I felt the blood drain from my face. but I reviewed all our financial statements. He created parallel accounting systems, Detective Walsh said. What you saw were sanitized reports showing legitimate charitable activities. The real transactions were hidden in encrypted files with separate banking relationships you never knew existed. The detective showed me printouts of bank statements from accounts I'd never seen before. Morrison Foundation Relief Fund, Educational Excellence Northwest, Pacific Student Development Initiative, all organizations that appeared legitimate but were actually conduits for moving dirty money. Look at this, Sonia pointed to a transaction report. Every time your foundation received a major donation from a legitimate source, Richmond would create a matching fake donation from one of his shell companies. Your real donors were unknowingly providing cover for money laundering operations. Thought about all the charity galas I'd organized, all the major donors I'd cultivated, all the legitimate educational initiatives we'd funded. So everything we accomplished for students was still real, Detective Walsh assured me. Your foundation did help hundreds of students, but Richmond was using those legitimate activities to justify much larger financial flows that had nothing to do with charity. Sonia pulled out another file. This explains Dawn's role too. She wasn't just his mistress, she was his operational partner. Look at these travel records. The documents showed that Dawn's vacations with Richmond weren't just romantic getaways. They were business trips to meet with offshore banking contacts, cryptocurrency brokers, and clients seeking financial services that skirted legal boundaries. Dawn has an MBA in international finance, Detective Walsh explained. She wasn't hired as Richmond's assistant. She was recruited as his money laundering specialist. The affair was probably secondary to their business partnership. I stared at photos of Dawn and Richmond meeting with various individuals in expensive restaurants across the country. So, when I thought I was discovering an affair, you were actually uncovering a criminal enterprise, Sonia finished. Richmond married you for your family's credibility and social connections, then spent 15 years building a money laundering operation using your foundation as cover. The scope of the betrayal was staggering. Not only had Richmond never loved me, he'd married me specifically to gain access to the respectability needed for serious financial crimes. What does this mean legally? I asked. Detective Walsh looked grim. Richmond is looking at federal charges: money laundering, tax evasion, wire fraud, racketeering. We're talking about potential decades in prison. And Dawn? She's already been arrested. Apparently, she thought fleeing the country would help, but international money laundering leaves a very clear trail. 2 weeks after Richmond's arrest, I discovered that our foundation wasn't his only target. It was just the most successful node in a network of charitable fraud that stretched across the Pacific Northwest. The FBI's investigation had uncovered a systematic operation that exploited the trust and credibility of multiple nonprofit organizations. Mrs. Morrison, we need to show you something, FBI Special Agent Mila Reeves said, spreading aerial photographs across my dining room table. The images showed luxury properties in Vancouver, San Francisco, and the Cayman Islands, all purchased through shell companies connected to Richmond's operation. These properties were bought with money stolen from 7 different charitable organizations, Agent Reeves explained. Your foundation was the flagship, but Richmond and Dawn were running similar schemes with environmental groups, animal welfare organizations, and educational foundations across 3 states. I stared at a photo of a beachfront mansion in Grand Cayman. How many other women like me were there? At least 4 that we've identified so far, she replied grimly. All married to men running consulting firms that managed charitable organizations, all with family money and social connections that provided credibility. All kept in the dark while their husbands built criminal enterprises using their foundations as cover. Agent Reeves showed me surveillance photos of Richmond meeting with other men in expensive restaurants. Your husband was essentially franchising his model. He taught other consultants how to marry into established families, gain control of charitable organizations, and use them for money laundering operations. The scope was staggering. So, this was never about business success or social status. It was about creating the perfect cover for financial crimes, she confirmed. Richmond specifically targeted you because your family's reputation in Seattle made the Morrison Foundation above suspicion. No one investigates charities run by old money families with impeccable social credentials. I learned that Don wasn't Richmond's first criminal partner either. Over the past 7 years, he'd worked with 3 different women, all recruited for their financial expertise and willingness to participate in illegal activities. Dawn was simply the most recent and most ambitious. The other wives, I asked, did they know? 2 of them suspected something, but were too afraid to investigate. One discovered the truth and was threatened into silence. You're the first who decided to fight back publicly. Agent Reeves pulled out a thick file. Because of your courage in exposing this at the gala, we've been able to unravel the entire network. Without that public revelation forcing Richmond to panic and attempt to destroy evidence, we might never have discovered how extensive this operation was. The investigation had revealed that Richmond's network had stolen over $3 million from charitable organizations, money that should have funded education, environmental protection, and social services across the region. Hundreds of legitimate projects had been compromised or canceled because of their systematic theft. What happens to the other foundations? I asked. Most will be able to recover once we seize the criminal assets. The properties, the offshore accounts, the luxury items, everything will be liquidated and returned to the legitimate charitable organizations they robbed. But perhaps most disturbing was learning that Richmond had been planning to expand the operation nationally. They'd identified potential targets in major cities across the country. Wealthy women with family foundations who could be manipulated into providing cover for increasingly sophisticated financial crimes. You stopped something that was about to become much larger, Agent Reeves said. Your decision to expose Richmond publicly prevented this network from expanding to victimize dozens of other foundations and hundreds of other families. I realized that Dawn's accidental photo message hadn't just exposed one affair. It had unraveled a criminal conspiracy that threatened the integrity of charitable giving throughout the Pacific Northwest. 1 month after the gala disaster, I sat, across from Seattle's top federal prosecutor, reviewing the criminal case that would likely send my husband to prison for the next 20 years. But more importantly, I was building a strategy to ensure that none of the other victims in Richmond's network would face the financial devastation that typically follows charitable fraud scandals. Mrs. Morrison, your cooperation has been instrumental, U.S. Attorney Gavin Holbrook said, closing a thick file. But I want to prepare you for what's coming. Richmond's defense team will try to paint you as a co-conspirator who's now attempting to avoid responsibility. I'd expected this. Richmond's new attorney, expensive enough to suggest he'd hidden more money than we'd initially discovered, had already leaked stories to friendly reporters suggesting I'd known about the financial irregularities all along. My documentation proves otherwise, I replied, sliding across a folder. Every decision I made regarding foundation finances has a paper trail showing Richmond's approval was required. Every major transaction I initiated can be traced to his explicit authorization. Sonia Martinez, my divorce attorney, leaned forward. Beverly's been documenting everything meticulously since this started. We have recordings of Richmond threatening her, attempting to manipulate her testimony, and offering bribes through intermediaries to remain silent. Recordings? Attorney Holbrook looked intrigued. Richmond apparently believed that 15 years of marriage had made me helplessly dependent on his guidance, I explained. He kept calling me from jail, providing detailed instructions about how to manage the federal investigation. He never considered that someone who'd organized hundreds of charity events might understand the value of documentation. The recordings were devastating to Richmond's defense. In his own voice, he'd admitted to the systematic embezzlement, explained how he'd psychologically manipulated me to prevent discovery, and outlined plans to intimidate other victims in his Network to prevent them from cooperating with federal investigators. What about asset recovery? I asked. This was the crucial issue. 7 charitable organizations had been devastated by Richmond's network, and hundreds of legitimate programs faced cancellation unless we could recover the stolen funds. This is where your background becomes invaluable, Attorney Holbrook said. We need someone with credibility in the nonprofit sector to coordinate the victim organizations, help track down hidden assets, and eventually oversee the distribution of recovered funds. I'd been hoping he would ask. Over the past month, I'd been quietly networking with the other victimized foundations, building relationships with their boards, and developing a comprehensive strategy for institutional recovery that went far beyond simple financial restitution. I've already been working with the other organizations, I admitted. We've formed an informal consortium to share information, coordinate legal strategies, and develop better oversight procedures to prevent future fraud. Sonia smiled. Beverly's essentially created a new consulting specialty, helping charitable organizations recover from systematic fraud. She's already been approached by nonprofits in Portland and San Francisco who've discovered similar vulnerabilities. The irony wasn't lost on me. Richmond had spent 15 years using my social connections and organizational skills to facilitate criminal activity. Now I was using those same abilities to help victims recover from his crimes and prevent similar fraud from destroying other charitable organizations. There's something else, Attorney Holbrook said, producing another file. We've identified other women in similar situations across the country. Wives of men running charitable organizations who've discovered financial irregularities but are afraid to come forward because of threats, intimidation, or financial dependence. I thought about the 4 other wives Agent Reeves had mentioned, women who'd suspected their husband's criminal activities but felt powerless to act. They need support, legal protection, and probably most importantly, proof that they can survive, financially and socially after exposing their husband's crimes. Exactly. Would you be willing to serve as a resource for these women? Help them understand their options, connect them with appropriate legal representation, and provide guidance about protecting themselves during the investigation process. I realized that Richmond's betrayal had inadvertently created a new purpose for my life. Instead of being the perfect wife facilitating someone else's success, I could help other women escape similar situations and rebuild authentic lives from the wreckage of their marriages. 6 months after the gala, what had started as my personal catastrophe had evolved into something larger and more meaningful than I could have imagined. The conference room at the downtown Marriott was packed with 73 women from across the country, all wives or partners of men who'd used charitable organizations as fronts for financial crimes. When I received Beverly's email, said Helen Richardson from Portland, addressing the group, I thought I was the only person stupid enough to miss the signs that my husband was stealing from our environmental foundation. Learning that this was a systematic pattern, that we were all specifically targeted for our social connections and trustworthiness, changed everything. I watched these women, executives, community leaders, philanthropists, as they shared stories eerily similar to my own. The gradual erosion of decision-making authority, the subtle psychological manipulation designed to undermine confidence, the carefully constructed isolation that made questioning their husband's activities seem like betrayal rather than due diligence. Dr. Amanda Foster, a forensic accountant from San Francisco, presented her findings to the group. The pattern is remarkably consistent across all cases. These men specifically sought out women with inherited wealth, family foundations, or established social credibility. They used romance and marriage as tools to gain access to charitable organizations that could serve as money laundering fronts. The statistics were staggering. Our informal network had identified 47 similar cases across 12 states, representing over $8 million in stolen charitable funds. But more importantly, we documented the systematic nature of the targeting and manipulation that made these crimes possible. The legal system treats each case individually. I explained to the group, but we've proven this was a coordinated strategy. These men shared information, tactics, and even specific targets through informal networks in the consulting and financial services industries. Margaret Santos from Phoenix raised her hand. What can we do beyond pursuing individual criminal cases? How do we prevent this from happening to other women? This was the crucial question that had driven me to organize the conference. Individual justice wasn't enough. We needed systematic change to protect charitable organizations and the women who ran them. We're proposing legislative reforms at both state and federal levels, I announced, revealing the comprehensive policy platform we'd been developing. Enhanced oversight requirements for charitable organizations, mandatory financial literacy training for board members, and most importantly, legal protections for whistleblowers who expose financial irregularities in nonprofit organizations. The policy proposals had emerged from months of collaboration with victim advocacy groups, nonprofit oversight organizations, and progressive legislators who understood that charitable fraud undermined public trust in philanthropic giving. But, perhaps most importantly, we were creating a support network that could help women in similar situations recognize warning signs, document suspicious activities, and safely extract themselves from abusive relationships before the criminal behavior escalated. I want to read something, said Jennifer Walsh from Denver, standing with a letter in her hands. This is from a woman in Minneapolis whose husband has been pressuring her to modify oversight procedures at their family foundation. She's been feeling crazy, like she's being paranoid and controlling. But after reading our materials online, she's realized she's seeing the early stages of what we all experienced. The letter described behavior patterns we all recognized. The gradual redirection of financial decisions through the husband, the introduction of new consultants with questionable credentials, the pressure to reduce board oversight in the name of operational efficiency. She's documenting everything now, Jennifer continued, and she's prepared to expose the operation before it fully develops. Because of our work, another foundation will be protected, and another woman won't have to experience the betrayal we've all survived. As I looked around the room at these remarkable women who'd transformed their victimization into advocacy, I realized that Richmond's systematic targeting had inadvertently created something he never anticipated: a network of informed, motivated, and strategically positioned women capable of exposing and preventing charitable fraud on a national scale. 9 months after the gala, I stood in the reception area of my new office building in downtown Seattle, reading the brass nameplate that still felt surreal. Morrison Recovery Group, Nonprofit Fraud Prevention and Victim Advocacy. What had started as my personal nightmare had become a thriving consulting firm, specializing in protecting charitable organizations from the exact type of systematic abuse Richmond had perfected. Beverly, your 2 p.m. appointment is here, my assistant announced. I'd hired Sarah Chen, not to be confused with anyone Richmond might have known, specifically because she had a background in forensic accounting and absolutely no connections to Seattle's traditional nonprofit community. My appointment was Victoria Martinez, the daughter of a prominent Portland family whose environmental foundation had been infiltrated by someone using Richmond's playbook. Unlike me, Victoria had caught the warning signs early, but she needed help documenting the evidence and safely extracting her organization from the criminal operation. I can't believe how similar the pattern is, Victoria said, reviewing the checklist we'd developed for identifying charitable fraud operations. The gradual takeover of financial decisions, the pressure to reduce board oversight, the introduction of new consultants with impressive credentials but questionable backgrounds. Over the past 6 months, Morrison Recovery Group had consulted with 37 charitable organizations across the Pacific Northwest, helping them identify vulnerabilities, strengthen oversight procedures, and in several cases, expose ongoing fraud before it caused devastating damage. The most important thing, I explained to Victoria, is that you're not alone, and you're not crazy. These operations are specifically designed to make intelligent, capable women question their own judgment. That's how they prevent detection. But perhaps most rewarding was the call I'd received the previous week from the Department of Justice. Our work documenting the systematic nature of charitable fraud had contributed to federal legislation requiring enhanced oversight and whistleblower protections for nonprofit organizations. The Morrison-Richardson Act, named for me and Helen Richardson from Portland, would be signed into law next month. "There's something else I want to discuss," I told Victoria. "We're launching a training program for women who want to help other victims of charitable fraud. It's part legal advocacy, part crisis counseling, part forensic accounting. We call it the Authentic Partnership Program." The irony of the name wasn't lost on me. Richmond had spent 15 years talking about authentic partnership while systematically betraying every principle the phrase represented. Now I was building something that actually embodied those values. My phone buzzed with a text from my new romantic interest, David Torres, a public defender I'd met through the Victim Advocacy Network. Unlike my relationship with Richmond, this one was built on genuine mutual respect, shared values, and complete financial transparency. David had insisted on signing a relationship agreement that explicitly protected my business assets and decision-making autonomy. "I want to show you something," I told Victoria, pulling out a photo from my desk drawer. It was from last month's first annual Charitable Fraud Prevention Conference, showing 73 women who'd survived similar betrayals, now working together to protect other organizations and empower other women. A year ago, I thought discovering my husband's affair was the worst thing that could happen to me, I said. I had no idea it was actually the beginning of the most meaningful work I'd ever do. Victoria smiled, the first genuine expression of hope I'd seen from her since she'd arrived. "So there really is life after this kind of betrayal?" "Not just life," I replied. "Purpose, authenticity, and the kind of success that can't be stolen because it's built on your own abilities rather than someone else's manipulation." Through the window of my office, I could see Elliott Bay and the Olympic Mountains beyond. The same view I'd had from the Morrison Foundation office, but everything looked different now. Clearer, more honest. Finally mine. 18 months after the gala. I was reviewing client files in my office when Sarah announced that Richmond was on the phone. He'd been released on bail pending appeal, his conviction for federal racketeering and money laundering charges under review by a higher court. I hadn't spoken to him since his sentencing 6 months earlier. "Beverly, we need to talk." His voice sounded different, smaller, less commanding than the man who'd once dominated every conversation. "I'm at the Starbucks across from your office. Please, just give me 10 minutes. Against my better judgment, I agreed. Curiosity, perhaps, or maybe the need for closure that comes from facing your past with the confidence of who you've become. Richmond looked older, thinner, his once perfect appearance diminished by 18 months of legal battles and public disgrace. He'd lost the commanding presence that had made him Seattle's golden boy of consulting. Now he just looked like what he'd always been underneath, a mediocre man who'd built his success on manipulation and theft. "You look well," he said as I sat across from him. "Successful. I've been reading about your consulting firm in the business journals." "What do you want, Richmond?" "I want to explain, to apologize, to help you understand that everything I did was motivated by love, by wanting to build something worthy of you and your family's reputation." I studied his face, looking for any trace of the charm that had once convinced me he was my perfect partner. "You embezzled $3 million from charitable organizations to fund money laundering operations. Which part of that was motivated by love?" "The pressure, Beverly. You don't understand the pressure of living up to the Morrison name, of trying to be worthy of your family's legacy. I made mistakes, but I was trying to build something that would make you proud." The psychological manipulation was still there, refined by 18 months of practice with defense attorneys and prison counselors. The attempt to make me responsible for his choices, to frame his crimes as misguided devotion rather than calculated exploitation. Richmond, I've spent the past year and a half helping other women recognize exactly this type of manipulation. You targeted me specifically because my family's reputation would provide cover for your criminal activities. You never loved me. You loved what I could do for your operation. His expression shifted, the mask of remorse slipping to reveal something harder underneath. Fine. You want honesty? You were perfect for what I needed. Naive, trusting, socially connected, and just insecure enough to let me manage the details while you played the gracious hostess. If you'd been smarter, none of this would have worked. There it was, the truth he'd hidden behind 15 years of performed affection and partnership rhetoric. Thank you, I said, standing to leave. That's exactly what I needed to hear. Thank you? He looked confused. For confirming that everything I've built since discovering your fraud is real? My business, my relationships, my sense of purpose, all of it is authentic because it's not built on lies or manipulation or stolen money, unlike everything we had together. Richmond's face flushed with anger. You destroyed my life over a mistake. One moment of weakness and you turned it into a federal case that— One moment? I laughed, genuinely amused by his revision of history. Richmond, you ran a criminal enterprise for 7 years. You systematically stole from children's education funds. You defrauded multiple charitable organizations. You manipulated and psychologically abused multiple women. I leaned closer, my voice dropping to the same whisper I'd used in the ballroom 18 months earlier. But most importantly, you underestimated me. You thought I was too weak, too dependent, too invested in appearances to fight back. That was your biggest mistake. As I walked back to my office, I realized that this conversation had given me something I hadn't known I needed. Absolute confirmation that the woman I'd become was incomparably stronger than the woman I'd been. 2 years after Dawn accidentally sent me those Santorini vacation photos, I stood in the same grand ballroom at the Fairmont Olympic Hotel, where Richmond's empire had spectacularly collapsed. But tonight, the space was filled with a different kind of energy entirely. This was the second annual Charitable Fraud Prevention Conference, and the transformation was remarkable. 300 attendees, nonprofit executives, board members, federal investigators, and survivors of charitable fraud, filled tables where Seattle's elite had once witnessed the most spectacular marriage implosion in the city's social history. The irony of hosting this event in the same space where my old life had ended felt like poetry. 2 years ago, in this very room, I thought I was exposing one man's betrayal, I said, addressing the audience from the same podium where Richmond had delivered his speech about authentic partnership. I had no idea I was uncovering a nationwide criminal network that threatened the integrity of charitable giving across America. The audience included faces I now knew well. Helen Richardson from Portland, whose environmental foundation had recovered completely and now served as a model for fraud prevention. Victoria Martinez, who'd become the West Coast coordinator for our victim advocacy network. Margaret Santos from Phoenix, whose foundation had not only survived her husband's attempted fraud, but had grown stronger through implementing our oversight protocols. But perhaps most meaningful were the newer faces, women who'd contacted us before their husbands' criminal operations had fully developed, women who'd recognized the warning signs and taken action to protect their organizations before devastating damage occurred. The Morrison-Richardson Act has now been implemented in 43 states, I continued, providing legal protections for whistleblowers and requiring enhanced oversight for charitable organizations. We've documented the prevention of over $12 million in attempted fraud, protecting hundreds of legitimate charitable programs from criminal exploitation. David Torres sat at the front table, smiling with the pride of someone who understood exactly how far I'd traveled from the woman who'd been performing the role of Richmond's perfect wife. Our relationship had evolved into something I'd never experienced before, a genuine partnership built on mutual respect, shared values, and complete emotional honesty. We'd moved in together 6 months ago, after extensive conversations about financial boundaries, career priorities, and personal autonomy. David had insisted on signing a comprehensive relationship agreement that protected both our individual assets and decision-making independence. Unlike my marriage to Richmond, this relationship enhanced my personal strength rather than diminishing it. But perhaps most importantly, I said, concluding my speech, we've proven that systematic betrayal can become the foundation for systematic empowerment. Every woman who recognizes manipulation tactics becomes capable of helping others. Every organization that strengthens oversight procedures becomes a model for institutional integrity. As applause filled the ballroom, I looked out at an audience of people committed to protecting charitable organizations and empowering victims of financial fraud. The same space where Richmond had been exposed as a criminal now hosted an annual conference dedicated to preventing the crimes he'd perfected. After the event, I walked through Seattle's streets with David, past the Morrison Foundation office, that now housed a small law firm, past the coffee shop where Richmond had made his pathetic attempt at reconciliation, past all the locations that had once defined my world as Mrs. Richmond Morrison. Any regrets? David asked as we reached the waterfront, Elliott Bay stretching out before us under a canopy of stars. I thought about Dawn's accidental photo message, the moment that had shattered my perfect facade and revealed the criminal enterprise underneath. Only that it took me 15 years to discover who I really was. Dawn had made a mistake, all right, but it had been the best mistake of my life. The woman who'd spent 15 years performing the role of the perfect wife had died in that ballroom. 2 years ago, the woman who'd emerged from the wreckage was finally, authentically, uncompromisingly mine. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.